Ethan Thorne, son of a powerful billionaire, lived a life of luxury until, without warning, his father, desperate, trusted a private pharmaceutical company with an experimental treatment. Nothing worked until a new butler, Old Man Albert, noticed something others missed. His quiet presence uncovered a hidden truth buried in silence, lies, and corporate greed. What he found would not only change Ethan's fate, but expose a secret darker than anyone imagined. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Walter Thorne was once a powerful man known for his success and wealth. He lived in a massive mansion near Boston with his wife Clara. Everything in his life seemed perfect, but that changed forever on the night Clara gave birth to their first and only child, Ethan. Complications during childbirth led to her death, and Walter was left alone to raise their newborn son. After that night, he became a different person. He stopped attending meetings, avoided social events, and spent most of his time locked away in his home. The mansion, once filled with life, became silent and empty. Walter's world now revolved only around Ethan. He loved his son deeply, but the guilt over Clara's death never left him. He blamed himself for not being able to save her. This guilt made him cold and distant from everyone else. Though he provided Ethan with the best life money could buy, Walter could never escape the feeling that something important had been broken forever. Walter made sure his son had every comfort, thinking it would somehow make up for what they both had lost. But when Ethan turned 6, something strange began to happen. One morning, he told his father his legs felt strange. At first, Walter thought it was just something small, maybe a cramp or a bruise from playing, but the numbness didn't go away. Within a few days, Ethan had trouble walking. Walter called their private doctor, who ran tests and suggested specialists. More doctors came, but none could figure out what was wrong. Ethan's condition kept getting worse, and within weeks, he couldn't walk at all. He was stuck in a wheelchair and nobody could explain why. Walter was terrified. Watching his son suffer without answers brought back the pain of losing Clara. He felt helpless again, desperate for a solution. Walter turned to every possible source of help. He spent days reading medical reports, calling experts from around the world, and flying in doctors who claimed to know about rare illnesses. Still, nothing changed. Then one of his connections told him about a pharmaceutical company named MediGen. They were working on a new treatment, one that had not yet been approved, but showed promise. It claimed it could help children with unexplained nerve damage. With no other hope in sight, Walter contacted MediGen. The company responded quickly, offering to begin the treatment immediately. They warned him it was experimental and carried risks, but Walter didn't hesitate. He signed the papers and let them begin the process on Ethan. He believed this was the only chance left to help his son. Treatment started right away. Walter was full of hope again. He watched Ethan closely every day, waiting for any sign that things might turn around. But that hope didn't last long. As the months passed, things took a turn for the worse. Instead of getting better, Ethan's condition continued to decline. He became weaker and started losing movement in his arms. He was tired all the time and barely spoke. Walter contacted MediGen repeatedly, demanding updates, but the answers were always vague. They told him to be patient, that the treatment took time, and that side effects were normal, but Walter could see the truth with his own eyes. His son was slipping away. The mansion, already quiet, began to feel colder and more lifeless. Walter stopped talking to his staff. Some of them quit, while others were let go. The once busy halls were now silent. Even the smell of fresh food and the sound of cleaning had disappeared. Walter barely left Ethan's side, watching him grow weaker every day, began to question everything, his choices, his trust in MediGen, whether he was cursed to lose the people he loved. The home that was once a symbol of wealth and stability now felt more like a tomb. Walter rarely left Ethan's room. He stopped working completely and didn't respond to business calls or emails. His fortune remained untouched, but none of it mattered anymore. Every part of his focus was on Ethan. He barely slept, afraid something might happen while he wasn't watching. Sometimes he'd just sit next to Ethan's bed for hours, silently, blaming himself for making the wrong decisions. He thought about Clara constantly, about how he had failed her, and now was failing their son too. Oh, The walls of the mansion, once filled with family portraits and warmth, now seemed to close in on him. The doctors had no new ideas. MediGen still insisted they were doing everything they could, but Walter no longer believed them. Felt like he had traded his son's life for false hope. It was the same feeling he had the night Clara died, powerless, confused, and full of regret. By now, there was almost no one left in the mansion. The gardeners, cooks, and maids were all gone. Only a nurse remained, and even she looked like she was ready to leave. The house felt like it was falling apart slowly, just like the family inside it. Walter spent his days in silence. He no longer ate regular meals and sometimes forgot to change clothes. Didn't look like a businessman anymore, just a tired, broken man trying to keep his son alive. Ethan barely spoke, couldn't move much, and had to be helped with everything. Walter tried to read to him, tried to smile, but everything felt forced. The bond between father and son was still there, but it was full of pain and sadness. Every day felt heavier than the last. Walter didn't know how much more he could take. He kept telling himself he had to stay strong for Ethan. But inside, he felt like he was already losing everything again, just like when he lost Clara. Old man Albert arrived at the Thorne Mansion early in the morning. A black car dropped him off at the gate, and he walked up the long driveway with a single suitcase in hand. People who only followed instructions without ever connecting with his son? Old man Albert was different. He came with strong recommendations, but what caught Walter's attention during the interview was his calm voice and steady gaze. He didn't speak much about his past, only saying he had worked in homes before and was used to difficult environments. What he didn't mention was that he had once lost a child, his only son, during a tragic accident. That pain never left him. On his first day, the mansion felt cold and silent. The staff was gone, and the air felt heavy. He saw Walter once briefly. He gave him a small nod and returned to his office. It was clear that this house carried sadness inside its walls. As he began exploring the house, old man Albert noticed how empty it was. There was dust. In the corners, faded furniture, and rooms that hadn't been used in a long time. He found the kitchen, cleaned it up, and began preparing something light for himself. No one asked him to cook, but the silence was uncomfortable. Later, he carefully made his way toward Ethan's room. He didn't knock, just listened quietly at the door. No sound came from inside. Walter hadn't given him any details about Ethan's condition, just that he was paralyzed and required help when needed. Eventually, he entered his small assigned room and began unpacking. The hours passed slowly. In the late afternoon, he passed Walter in the hallway. He barely looked at him and kept walking without saying anything. Old man Albert wasn't surprised. He had seen that kind of behavior before. People burying their emotions to avoid pain. He sensed that both father and son were holding in more than they could handle. At dinner time, old man Albert tried to ask if Ethan would be eating. Walter simply said he doesn't eat with others and walked away. He left a tray at Ethan's door anyway, unsure if he would take it. The house remained quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, but empty. That night, he went to his room, but couldn't sleep. Around 10 o'clock, he walked down the hallway again. That was when he heard something. It was faint, coming from behind Ethan's door. He stopped and listened. There it was, a soft, broken cry. Old man Albert stayed frozen for a second. Then he leaned in and heard his voice. It was weak, almost like he was whispering to himself. "Why don't my legs work anymore?" He asked quietly, over and over. His heart sank. He didn't open the door. He didn't want to scare him or make things worse. But in that moment, something inside him changed. He knew this child was carrying a pain deeper than most adults. The next morning, old man Albert began his work early, cleaned the rooms near Ethan's and straightened up the hallways. No one had asked him to do it, but it felt right. He also checked the tray he had left outside Ethan's door. The food was mostly untouched. Still, he took it back to the kitchen and prepared something new. This time, a bit simpler. Old man Albert tried to find small ways to reach Ethan, even without speaking to him directly. He left fresh water in his room and placed a small stuffed animal on a shelf. Later, he tried to ask Walter about Ethan's routine. Walter gave short answers. He doesn't go outside, he said. He doesn't like visitors. Every sentence from him sounded final, like he didn't want to talk anymore. Old man Albert didn't push. He understood this was a man drowning in his own guilt. But even if Walter didn't want help, he knew Ethan did, even if he couldn't say it out loud yet. In the days that followed, Old Man Albert kept working silently. He didn't try to force conversations. Instead, he created patterns of comfort. He made sure Ethan's room was warm and clean. He learned what time he liked to wake up, when he preferred to rest, and how he reacted to different foods. Although Ethan still didn't speak to him, he could tell he noticed his presence. Once he walked past his open door and saw him watching him from his bed, he didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. That was enough for him. He also noticed how Walter stayed locked in his office, barely stepping out. Sometimes he'd hear him pacing inside or arguing over the phone. The whole house felt stuck, as if time had stopped. But Old Man Albert believed it could be different. He wasn't here just to clean or serve food. He had come to help, truly help, not out of duty, but because he knew what loss felt like, and he saw it in both father and son. Then one night, it happened again. Old Man Albert had just finished folding some laundry when he heard soft cries from Ethan's room. This time, he didn't just stand there. He gently knocked on the door and said, "It's Old Man Albert. I'm just outside if you need anything." There was silence, then a whisper. "Why won't my legs listen to me?" The sadness in his voice was clear. Old Man Albert didn't respond right away. He stayed by the door, letting him know he wasn't alone. "I don't know why," he said softly. "I'm here, Ethan. I'll stay with you." He meant it. In that moment, a decision formed in his mind. He wasn't going to treat this as just another job. This was now his mission to help Ethan heal however he could. He couldn't bring back his own son, and he couldn't erase this boy's pain, but he could stand by him. From that moment forward, he would not give up on him. Over the following weeks, Old Man Albert became more familiar with the daily routine inside the Thorne Mansion. Most days were quiet, with very little change. Walter remained distant, mostly inside his office, speaking rarely and avoiding eye contact. Ethan continued to stay in his room, barely speaking, barely moving. But Old Man Albert was patient, learned how to take care of him gently, helping him dress, brushing his hair, and making sure he ate at least a little. One thing that caught his attention was a daily injection Ethan received. Every morning, at exactly 9 a.m., a courier from MediGen arrived at the house. He handed a small cooler to Walter, who took it straight to Ethan's room. No one else was allowed to handle it. Old Man Albert asked once what it was, and Walter just said, "It's part of his treatment." He didn't ask again, but he never stopped noticing. The man who delivered it always wore black gloves, didn't make small talk, and never came inside the house. It seemed strange, but no one questioned it. One morning, Old Man Albert was helping Ethan put on his shoes. It was something he did every day, but this time, something unexpected happened. As he reached for one of the shoes, Ethan's hand accidentally knocked over a small glass bottle that had been on his bedside table. The bottle hit the floor and shattered. The liquid inside spilled quickly and began to spread across the wooden floorboards. Sharp metallic smell filled the air almost instantly. Old Man Albert pulled Ethan back a little to keep him away from the broken glass. Then he reached down with a tissue to try and clean it. But the moment it touched the liquid, his fingers started to sting. He flinched and dropped the tissue. His skin felt like it was burning slightly. Old Man Albert looked at Ethan, surprised and confused. He had gone pale and started crying quietly. Through tears, he said, "That's the medicine the doctor makes me take, but it doesn't help me. It makes me feel worse every time." He looked closer at what was left of the bottle. There was no real label, only a small white sticker with the code REXE17 printed on it. No instructions, no company name, nothing else. His mind began to race. Why was there no name on something being injected into a child? He asked Ethan gently. "Do you know what this is for?" He shook his head and said, "They never tell me. They just say, I have to take it." Old Man Albert helped him onto the bed and went to the hallway to find something to clean up the mess. But by the time he returned, the broken bottle was gone. He hadn't heard anyone enter the room, and Ethan said he hadn't moved. The only other explanation was that someone had quietly taken it when he stepped out. Old Man Albert checked the hallway, but it was empty. He felt a cold tension in his chest. Someone had been watching, and they had acted fast. He went straight to Walter's office and knocked on the door. When he opened it, he told him what happened. He didn't react the way he expected. Instead of concern, he looked angry. "You should have called me immediately." He said, "This treatment is sensitive. You don't understand how it works." Old Man Albert tried to explain what Ethan had told him. The medicine made him feel worse, not better, but Walter cut him off. "It's not up for discussion," he said. "My life knows what they're doing." He then told him to stay out of anything related to the injections and reminded him that he was only there to assist with daily care. Old Man Albert left the office feeling frustrated and worried. Something about Walter's reaction didn't feel right. If the treatment was really safe, why hide it? Why get angry instead of concerned? And most of all, why had someone taken the broken bottle so quickly without saying a word? The next morning, the MediGen courier returned like usual. Right at 9 a.m., Old Man Albert watched from a window as the man handed the cooler to Walter. The exchange was always the same, silent, fast, and strange. That day, he decided to follow the courier after he left. He waited a few minutes, then grabbed his coat and stepped outside. He didn't go far, just enough to see the black car he used. He wrote down the license plate number and watched as he drove off. He didn't know what he planned to do with that information yet, but he felt like he needed to start collecting clues. Later, he searched online for the REXE17 code, but found nothing. No medical references, no research papers, not even rumors on medical forums. It was as if the substance didn't officially exist. Old Man Albert began writing down everything he observed each day. Times, reactions, details. He felt alone in this, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that something terrible was happening behind closed doors. That night, as he helped Ethan get ready for bed, he sat next to him and asked again how he felt after the injections. Ethan looked away and stayed silent for a while. Then he said, "It hurts after. My stomach feels bad. My arms get heavy and I can't sleep well." Old Man Albert nodded and asked gently, "Did you ever tell your dad?" Ethan shook his head. "He doesn't listen. Says I have to take it or I won't get better." Old Man Albert looked around the room and noticed how little light there was. The air smelled faintly of chemicals. He realized he had entered a situation far more serious than he expected. He wasn't just a butler anymore. He was someone who had discovered a secret, a dangerous one. That night, he couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the broken bottle, the burning on his skin, and Ethan's scared face. For the first time, he truly understood that something deeply wrong was going on in this house, and he couldn't turn away. While cleaning the main bedroom one afternoon, Old Man Albert pulled open the bottom drawer of an old dresser. It was stiff, like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside, beneath a pile of faded scarves and some folded clothes, he found a small leather book. The cover was worn, and the edges of the pages were yellowed with age. When he opened it, he immediately saw the name Clara Thorne written on the first page. Old Man Albert's hands froze for a moment. Clara was Walter's late wife, Ethan's mother, the woman who had died during childbirth. Out of respect, Old Man Albert hesitated before reading further, but something pushed him forward. He sat on the edge of the bed and began reading. At first, the entries were light, talking about daily life, small moments decorating the nursery and excitement about the baby. But as the pages moved closer to the final days of the pregnancy, the tone changed. Clara wrote about feeling strange, numbness in her legs, dizziness, and unusual muscle pain. These details quickly caught Old Man Albert's full attention. Clara described how the symptoms began slowly. One morning, her legs felt weak. A few days later, she struggled to climb stairs, started feeling exhausted for no reason. Dizziness made it hard to stay on her feet for too long, and sometimes her hands would tremble. She visited doctors repeatedly, but they kept telling her everything was normal for a pregnancy. According to her entries, they prescribed her a special supplement to help with energy and nutrition. Clara mentioned that this supplement came directly from a private medical program connected to MediGen. Old Man Albert's breath caught in his throat when he read that name. Clara had taken something made by the same company that was now injecting Ethan every morning. The diary entries didn't stop there. Clara explained how the supplement was delivered in unmarked containers, how the doctors promised it would strengthen both her and the baby. But the symptoms continued to get worse, and she felt like no one was really listening to her concerns. What shocked Old Man Albert the most was that the symptoms Clara described were nearly identical to what Ethan had been going through. Tingling in the legs, weakness, and muscle issues. Clara even wrote a line that stayed with Old Man Albert long after he closed the book. "They tell me I'm imagining things, but I know something is wrong." The last entry was dated just 1 day before Clara went into labor. It ended suddenly, mid-sentence. It was no goodbye, no final thoughts, just a sharp stop, as if Clara hadn't had time to return and finish it. Old Man Albert sat there in silence, holding the book tightly. His mind was racing. If Clara had been affected by something related to MediGen during pregnancy, it was possible that Ethan's condition started before he was even born. It changed everything. This wasn't just a bad reaction to medication. This could be the result of something far deeper, something hidden. Old Man Albert knew he had to show the diary to Walter, no matter how he might respond. Later that evening, Old Man Albert gathered his courage and walked to Walter's office. He was sitting behind his desk, looking tired and distant as usual. He knocked once and stepped in, holding the diary in his hands. "I found this while cleaning the bedroom," he said carefully. Walter looked up without much interest. When he placed the book on the desk and opened it to one of the final entries, his expression changed. He stared at the pages but didn't read. "Clara's diary," Old Man Albert said softly. "She was having the same symptoms Ethan has now. She mentioned a supplement for MediGen." Walter closed the book immediately. His voice was cold when he finally spoke. "Reading that won't change anything," he said. "She's gone and nothing will bring her back." Old Man Albert tried to explain that it could help them understand what's happening to Ethan, but Walter stood up and ended the conversation. "Leave it alone," he said firmly. "You're here to take care of Ethan. Don't dig up the past." He wasn't angry at Walter, at least not completely. He saw the pain behind his harsh words, but he also saw something else. Fear. He didn't want to face what? The diary suggested. Maybe he already knew part of it. Maybe he had suspected something for years, but chose not to act. Old Man Albert returned to his room and placed the diary in a safe place. He reread the final pages again and again. Clara hadn't died suddenly. Her body had been warning her for weeks, and no one had believed her. Now, her son was suffering in almost the exact same way. Old Man Albert knew this wasn't just a coincidence. He also understood that he wouldn't get help from Walter. His silence wasn't just grief, it was denial, and that denial was dangerous. If he wanted to help Ethan, he would need to keep looking for answers on his own. No more waiting. No more hoping someone else would act. The next morning, Old Man Albert woke up early and started writing everything down. He copied Clara's last entries onto a separate notebook. He made a timeline listing the symptoms, the medications, the doctors Clara had mentioned. Then he added Ethan's medical routine, what he received, when, and how he reacted. It was all starting to form a pattern, a link that tied mother and son through a chain of hidden medical decisions. Old Man Albert also made a list of names, hoping to track down one of the doctors Clara had mentioned. If any of them were still working with MediGen, they might know what RxC17 really was, or what the supplement had contained. Old Man Albert felt a growing sense of urgency. Ethan was getting worse, not better, and time was running out. He didn't know what he would find or how dangerous it might be. But he had already made up his mind. If no one else was going to uncover the truth, he would, even if it meant doing it alone. One quiet afternoon, while Old Man Albert was organizing the living room, a black car pulled up in front of the mansion. A tall man in a blue suit stepped out and walked confidently to the front door. He looked polished, like someone used to giving orders. Walter met him at the entrance and led him inside without introducing him to anyone. Old Man Albert noticed him right away. His smile didn't seem real, and his words felt rehearsed. He greeted Walter with a firm handshake and spoke in a calm but overly smooth voice. "Dr. Gregory Walsh," he said, "clinical director at MediGen, brought the latest batch. This should help stabilize the boy's condition." He opened a small metal case and handed Walter a few clear glass vials. They looked identical to the ones Old Man Albert had seen before. He stood at a distance, pretending to dust a nearby shelf. The doctor walked over to Ethan's chair, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and quietly slipped something into a side pocket before walking out. After Dr. Gregory left, Old Man Albert waited until no one was watching and then carefully checked the pocket of Ethan's chair. His heart beat faster as he reached in and pulled out a small ampule. It looked exactly like the broken bottle from before. Clear liquid. No label, no instructions, just a strange, cold glass container. His fingers trembled slightly as he held it. He didn't know if it was meant to be hidden or simply forgotten. But either way, it made no sense. Why would a doctor secretly leave medicine in a child's chair? He wrapped the vial in a tissue and tucked it away in his apron pocket. The feeling of fear returned stronger than ever. Something was wrong with all of this. It wasn't just about miscommunication or bad treatment anymore. It was beginning to look like something more serious, something dangerous. Old Man Albert looked at Ethan, who was sitting quietly, unaware of what had just happened. He knew he couldn't stay quiet anymore. Later that evening, as Old Man Albert walked past the hallway near Walter's office, he noticed the door was slightly open. Walter was on the phone, speaking in a low but tense voice. He paused and stood quietly near the corner, careful not to make a sound. On the other end of the line, he heard Dr. Gregory's voice. He wasn't friendly now. His tone was sharp and direct. "There must be no mistakes, Walter," the doctor said. "No discussions with outsiders. No one else is to know about the formula, not even your staff. Total silence is part of the agreement." Walter tried to respond, but the doctor interrupted. "You've already received more than enough support from us. Don't forget what's at stake." The call ended shortly after. Old Man Albert stayed frozen in place, heart racing. The conversation hadn't sounded like professional guidance. It sounded like a threat. Gregory didn't care about Ethan's health. He cared about keeping things quiet. That one phone call changed how Old Man Albert saw everything inside the house. The next morning, Old Man Albert knew he had to be more careful than ever. From that day on, he started paying attention to every single detail. He began writing everything down in a small notebook he kept hidden under his bed. Every delivery, every visit, every word spoken between Walter and anyone from MediGen, he recorded all of it. He noticed that deliveries from MediGen now came every 2 days instead of once a week. The vials inside the cooler wareth, same size, always unmarked, and always handled only by Walter. Old Man Albert tried to talk to Walter again, asking if Ethan's treatment had changed. He answered vaguely and didn't meet his eyes. "The doctor knows what he's doing," he said. "I'm trusting the process." But Old Man Albert had stopped trusting any of it. He noticed Ethan's reactions to the injections were getting worse. He was more tired, more distant. His arms now showed bruises where the injections were given. No one else seemed to care, but Old Man Albert did. He knew he was watching something terrible unfold. Each time the courier arrived, Old Man Albert made sure to observe everything. He kept track of the time, the number of vials delivered, and how long Walter spent handling them. He even began checking the trash late at night for anything that might be discarded. Boxes, wrappers, used syringes. Once he found a slip of paper with the same code he had seen before, RXC17, still no instructions, still no explanation. When he asked Ethan how, Heffeld, after each injection, he gave the same answer. Worse, he said it quietly without emotion, like it had become normal. Old Man Albert felt helpless, but he didn't let it show. He comforted Ethan as best as he could and kept all his discoveries in his notebook. He started to suspect that Walter might not even know the full truth, that he might be blindly following orders out of desperation. But even if that was true, it didn't excuse what was happening. Old Man Albert couldn't let Ethan go through this alone. Not anymore. As the days passed, Old Man Albert's fear turned into determination. He knew now that something very serious was going on inside that house. Something that involved medicine, secret medicines, and silence enforced through fear. Dr. Gregory's visit had opened his eyes, and the hidden ampule confirmed that secrecy was part of the plan. Old Man Albert decided he would no longer be just a caretaker. He would become an investigator, a protector, someone who would not stop until he found out what they were doinked at, Ethan, and why. Each day he watched more carefully, listened more closely, and made sure to hide his notes well. He waited for any chance to gather more proof. He knew he had to be smart. One mistake could get him fired or worse. But he also knew that if he did nothing, Ethan would continue to suffer. From the moment Gregory walked out of that door, Old Man Albert had changed. He was no longer just suspicious. He was certain, and he was ready to do whatever it took to uncover the truth. Ethan's started to get worse. What began as weakness in his legs had now turned into something much more painful and frightening. He began having sharp pain in his back and stomach, sometimes crying for hours during the night. His arms twitched without control, and sometimes he couldn't hold objects or even lift his head properly. Fever came and went, especially in the early hours of the morning. Old Man Albert noticed sweat soaking his pillow, and his small hands gripping the bed sheets when the pain hit. Walter became more and more anxious, but he continued to rely on the MediGen treatment. Every time Ethan got worse, Walter called the company. They always promised that what Ethan was experiencing was normal and part of the body's adjustment. They also said the doses needed to increase for better results. Walter agreed, even though the cost was growing. Each new vial of the so-called medicine came with a heavy price. And Old Man Albert knew they were all paying for something that wasn't helping. Old Man Albert paid close attention to everything. He began tracking Ethan's symptoms in his notebook. Over time, he noticed something strange. Whenever a delivery was delayed and Ethan went a day or two without receiving his injection, his condition slightly improved. He still couldn't walk, but the pain lessened and the fevers didn't come. When the medication resumed, the spasms returned immediately. This happened more than once, and it was enough to convince him something was wrong with the treatment itself. He brought it up gently to Walter, but he dismissed it quickly. "He needs consistency," he said. "That's what the doctors keep telling me." Old Man Albert didn't argue, but he knew he couldn't rely on Walter anymore. He was blinded by hope and guilt. He started staying up late, watching the gates of the mansion, looking for anything unusual. One night around 11 p.m., he saw a delivery truck enter through the back. It didn't look like a medical vehicle. No logos, just a plain white truck, unmarked, moving quietly through the dark. That same night, Old Man Albert followed the truck on foot for a short distance after it left. He couldn't get too close without being noticed, but he took down the license plate number. The next morning, he used a computer in town to run a basic online search. It took time, but eventually he found a link between the truck and a company he had never heard of before. Biosynth Laboratories. It was hard to find any public information. The company had no website and almost nothing came up in news articles. Oh, but through a legal records database, he found one key detail. Biosynth was listed as a subsidiary of MediGen. That discovery made his stomach twist. He kept digging. A few small research articles and archive documents from years earlier mentioned Biosynth in connection with human testing. One vague document even referenced a substance code RxC17 that was the same label on Ethan's medication. Old Man Albert sat there shocked. It wasn't just bad medicine. It was part of a hidden research experiment. Over the next few days, Old Man Albert tried to confirm everything he could. He timed every night delivery. He noticed that not all boxes from the trucks went into the Thorne Mansion. Some were transferred to smaller vans parked near the property. Vans that later drove off in different directions. He tracked one of those vans on foot for a few blocks before losing it. When he returned home, he dug deeper into Biosynth. Eventually, he found a research abstract, not publicly available, but still saved in a scientific database. It described the testing of a new neurological compound in children with muscle-related illnesses. The file didn't name names, but it included symptoms: paralysis, spasms, fever, and eventual organ stress. It described the results as inconclusive and said testing was ongoing. That's when he realized Ethan wasn't sick because of an unknown disease. He was being used without consent to test something never approved for use, and the symptoms weren't side effects. They were exactly what the drug was designed to do. Old Man Albert's hands shook as he copied down everything he found. His notebook was now filled with records, dates, truck numbers, company names, symptoms, and reactions. He didn't know yet how to expose all of it, but he knew one thing for sure. Ethan had been turned into a test subject. The promises of healing were lies designed to keep Walter quiet and compliant. The rising costs weren't just for medicine. They were a payment to keep the system running smoothly without questions. Old Man Albert understood that if he confronted MediGen directly, they could silence him or make him disappear. He had seen how they operated, how they delivered unmarked drugs, how they threatened Walter over the phone. and how Dr. Gregory smiled with practiced words while hiding poison in a child's chair. But he wasn't planning to run or hide. He started taking photos of the vials, recording videos of the deliveries, and preparing copies of all the evidence. This time, he wouldn't let them cover it up. Now, every time Old Man Albert looked at Ethan, he saw more than a boy in pain. He saw the result of a powerful company's secret plan. He still acted normal during the day, helping with meals, cleaning the house, and staying close to Ethan. But behind the scenes, he was preparing to take action. He hid copies of his notes in 3 different places in the house, just in case someone tried to take them. He also started contacting people anonymously, looking for journalists or former employees of MediGen. Every night he double-checked his information and added new details. His fear had turned into resolve. The failing miracle that MediGen promised was nothing but a controlled disaster. Ethan wasn't being healed. He was being damaged on purpose. And now that Old Man Albert knew the truth, he wasn't going to stop until he found a way to end it. He had uncovered the heart of the problem. RxC-17 wasn't a treatment gone wrong. It was a human experiment, and Ethan was at the center of it. Old Man Albert had spent days gathering proof, documenting everything he could about Ethan's treatment, the deliveries from MediGen, and the connection to Biosynth Laboratories. His notebook was filled with dates, symptoms, photos, and names. After what he had learned, he couldn't stay silent anymore. That afternoon, he walked straight to Walter's office with the folder in his hands. He was sitting behind his desk reading papers, barely looking up as he entered. "We need to talk," he said firmly. He placed the folder on the desk and opened it. "This is everything I've found. Your son is not sick. He's being used in a drug test." Walter stared at the pages for a moment, but then pushed them aside. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice already rising. Old Man Albert didn't back down. He pointed at a document with the RxC-17 code and explained how Ethan's symptoms got worse after each dose. That's when Walter lost control. He shouted at him, accused him of wanting money, and told him to leave the house immediately. Old Man Albert stood there, shocked by his reaction. He had expected resistance, maybe disbelief, but not rage. Walter's hands were shaking as he pointed to the door. "You think I don't care about my son?" he yelled. "You come into my house accusing me after everything I've done." Old Man Albert tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. He repeated that he was fired and that he had no right to investigate anything. "I trusted you," he said. "Now get out before I call the police." Old Man Albert left the office with his heart pounding. He went straight to Ethan's room to check on him. He was breathing fast, his face red with fever. Then suddenly his body stiffened, and he started shaking uncontrollably. A strong convulsion took over him. Old Man Albert didn't think twice. He wrapped him in a blanket and rushed outside to the garden, hoping the fresh air might help. He placed him gently on a bench and held his hand, whispering that he would have been okay. While sitting in the garden with Ethan, trying to help him breathe, Old Man Albert heard footsteps behind him. He turned quickly and saw Dr. Gregory standing near the hedge, dressed in the same sharp blue suit. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold. "You've caused enough problems," he said. "Hand over what you took." Old Man Albert stood between him and Ethan. "I'm not giving you anything," he said. Gregory took a step closer, his hand reaching inside his coat. That's when he saw the gun. His body tensed, but he didn't move. "You have no idea what you're involved in," he said. "Return the files, and we'll forget this ever happened." Old Man Albert refused again, this time louder. As Gregory opened his mouth to threaten him once more, a voice came from the doorway. What the hell is going on? It was Walter. He stood there, watching the scene unfold. Gregory turned around, surprised and panicked. "This isn't what it looks like," he said quickly, but it was too late. Walter had heard everything. In his rush to leave, Gregory turned to run, but in the process, he dropped a folder he had been carrying under his arm. It hit the ground near the garden path and opened slightly. The logo of MediGen was printed on the front. Walter walked over and picked it up. He flipped through the pages and his face turned pale. The documents inside were internal reports, confidential ones, showing the full truth about RxC-17, The chemical was designed to cause temporary paralysis in young patients, forcing ongoing dependence on it. The goal wasn't to heal, but to keep the patients in treatment for as long as possible, ensuring continuous profit. Walter couldn't believe what he was reading. The doses, the side effects, and even Ethan's name were listed as part of the trial group. His hands trembled as he dropped the folder back to the ground. He had paid for every vial. He had trusted MediGen, and now he realized he had unknowingly allowed this to happen to his own son. Walter stood still for several seconds, silent and stunned. Old Man Albert stepped closer and said, "I tried to tell you." But Walter couldn't respond. He looked at Ethan, now sleeping in the blanket on the bench, and then back at the folder. His voice was low and broken when he finally spoke. "I gave them everything. I thought I was saving him." Old Man Albert nodded. "You were lied to, but it's not too late to stop it." Walter looked down at the papers again, then back at the house. Dr. Gregory was gone, having disappeared into the night, but his mistake had left behind the truth. Walter bent down, picked up the folder again, and held it tightly. For the first time in months, his face changed. The anger was gone, replaced by guilt and something else, determination. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew what had to be done. He had helped create this tragedy, and now he had to fix it somehow. They both returned to the house slowly, Old Man Albert carrying Ethan, while Walter followed closely behind. No one said much. The night felt heavier now, not because of confusion, but because of clarity. There were no more excuses or false hope. The truth had been exposed. Walter didn't try to defend MediGen anymore. He didn't argue or ask Old Man Albert to stay away from the matter. Instead, he asked him to show him everything he had collected. For the first time, they were on the same side. As Old Man Albert laid out his notes and photos, Walter took everything in. He looked tired, older than ever, but more focused. "They used my son to test a drug." He said more to himself than to him, and I helped them do it. Old Man Albert placed his hand on his arm. "Now we stop them." Walter nodded slowly. The damage had been done, but the fight wasn't over. The lies were no longer hidden, and Walter Thorne was finally ready to face the truth. Walter stayed awake the entire night, sitting at his desk, surrounded by the open folder from MediGen and the documents Old Man Albert had collected. The house was completely silent, but his mind was loud with thoughts. He read every single page line by line, unable to stop. The more he read, the worse it got. Ethan's name appeared multiple times along with codes and dates that matched their treatment schedule. Other children were listed too, some with notes about similar symptoms. Others marked as unresponsive or withdrawn from the trial. The language was cold, clinical, and without emotion. These weren't patients to MediGen. They were test subjects. He saw evidence of bribes paid to doctors, altered reports, and fake documents sent to parents. The company had used wealthy families as unknowing funders, hiding behind hope and promises. The guilt hit Walter hard. He had funded the slow suffering of his own son. Every signature, every payment, every quiet acceptance, he had played a part in all of it without even realizing. When Old Man Albert entered the office in the early morning, he found Walter still sitting at the desk. His eyes were red, and the pages were spread out everywhere. He looked up at him, but didn't say anything at first. He didn't have to. He could see everything in his face. The pain, the guilt, the realization. He walked over and sat beside him. For a long moment, there was silence. Then quietly, Walter said, "They used my son, and I let them." His voice broke. Old Man Albert placed a hand gently on his shoulder and told him it wasn't his fault. He shook his head. "I was so desperate to fix things. I didn't see what they were doing." That's when Old Man Albert, after holding it in for so long, finally told him the truth about his own past. His son had died years earlier after receiving a medication in a public hospital. That drug was later linked to MediGen. He had no idea they were connected until he saw the name again in this house. Walter turned to him, stunned. "So, you already knew what they were capable of?" he asked. Old Man Albert nodded slowly. "Not everything, but enough to be afraid." They both sat in silence again, the weight of their losses connecting them in a way words couldn't explain. What were the chances that both of them, one rich, one poor, had suffered from the same company's lies? It didn't feel like coincidence anymore. Maybe it was fate. Maybe they were meant to meet, meant to uncover the truth together. Walter finally let the emotions take over. He cried, not loud, but deeply. Old Man Albert stayed beside him, holding his hand, letting him release everything he had kept inside for years. When the tears stopped, Walter looked at him and said, "We have to stop them. We have to make this public," Old Man Albert agreed. They began making plans to copy the documents, contact the right people, and prepare everything. But they didn't realize that time was running out and that someone was already watching them. Later that day, as they prepared to leave the house and head into town, Old Man Albert went to check the cameras. He had developed the habit of reviewing the security system daily since things had started feeling unsafe. But this time, something was wrong. The screens were dark. Every camera feed showed no signal. He tried restarting the system, but nothing changed. Walter checked the door locks. They were all disabled. Panic started to set in. "This doesn't make sense," he said, walking through the house quickly, checking windows and entrances. Every system they relied on for safety had gone down at the same time. That couldn't be an accident. Old Man Albert checked the power box and found that the cables had been tampered with. Wires were cut, but not cleanly, ripped as if done in a hurry. The garden lights, the motion sensors, even the phone lines were dead. Walter looked around, trying to stay calm, but it was clear now. This wasn't a random failure. It was a warning. Someone had been here or was planning to return. Fear started to creep in. Walter closed all the curtains and told Old Man Albert to keep Ethan close. He checked every door again, this time placing furniture in front of some of them. They had planned to go to the police, to the press, to anyone who could help. But now they were trapped, at least for the moment. Old Man Albert called out for Ethan and brought him into the living room where they could all stay together. Walter paced back and forth, running through possibilities. "They know," he finally said. "MediGen knows we're going to expose them." Old Man Albert didn't ask how he knew. He felt it too. The folder, the confrontation in the garden, the missing data, all of it pointed to one thing. They were being watched. Everything had been fine until they tried to fight back. Now, the cameras were off. The house was open, and someone had made sure they would feel unsafe. Old Man Albert checked his pocket and felt the flash drive with the backups. "We still have what we need," he whispered. Walter looked at him with a mix of fear and resolve. "Then we have to move fast." But before they could do anything else, headlights flashed through the front window. A black car had just pulled into the driveway. Not the usual delivery truck. This was a sleek, dark sedan. The engine shut off. No one got out immediately. Walter stepped back from the window and signaled for Old Man Albert to stay low. The front door hadn't been locked because the system had failed. Old Man Albert moved to grab Ethan's wheelchair while Walter peeked through the side curtain. After a few seconds, the car door opened. A man stepped out slowly, dressed in a dark coat. He walked with purpose, his face hard to see in the dim light. But Walter recognized the shape, the way he moved. "It's him," he said quietly. "The one behind all of this?" Old Man Albert's hands tightened around the chair. The man wasn't just a messenger. He was the one who controlled it all. And now he had come to finish what he started. Inside the house, everything went silent. The air felt heavy, and every sound became sharper. The ticking clock, the creak of the floor under Walter's shoes. The front door handle moved slightly but didn't open. They still had a few moments before whoever was outside forced their way in. Old Man Albert looked at Walter and asked, "What do we do?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, slowly he turned and said, "We protect Ethan. We don't give up the evidence no matter what." Old Man Albert nodded. He grabbed the flash drive and tucked it deep into his coat pocket. Walter took the folder and moved toward the hidden space under the stairs. They hid everything as quickly as they could, then stood together, waiting. The truth was finally out, but now the cost of knowing it had become dangerously real. In that moment, they understood that exposing MediGen would not be easy. The man outside was proof of that. But even in fear, they were no longer alone, and they were no longer afraid to fight. Reginald Locke arrived just after noon. A black SUV stopped in front of the Thorne Mansion, and several men in dark suits stepped out first. They looked around the property, checking every corner before opening the door for the last passenger. Locke stepped out calmly, dressed in an expensive gray suit, his face expressionless. His presence filled the space with tension. Walter stood waiting near the front door. Old Man Albert stayed inside, watching from a distance while holding Ethan close. Locke walked in without hesitation, nodding briefly to Walter. "Let's talk," he said coldly. The two men entered the study, while the bodyguards waited nearby. Old Man Albert, worried but determined, followed quietly and stayed near the door where he could hear. Inside, Locke's tone was clear and direct. "We're prepared to offer you $20 million, he said. "In exchange, you'll sign an agreement to keep everything quiet. No police, no press, no lawsuits." Walter didn't speak. Locke leaned in and added, "Accept it or your son won't walk again." He didn't move from his spot, but quickly slipped his phone from his pocket, opened the voice recorder, and tapped the live stream button to a contact he had already warned. His journalist friend was now listening in real time. Back in the room, Locke continued speaking. "You don't understand how deep this goes, Walter. This isn't just about one boy. If you talk, everything collapses." Walter's hands were clenched. "You experimented on children," he said. Locke didn't deny it. "It was necessary for progress, and your money made it possible. So let's not pretend you're just a victim." Old Man Albert knew he had heard enough. He slowly stepped back into the hallway, texting one word to his contact: "Send." Just as he hit send, Locke stepped out and saw him. His eyes immediately dropped to the phone in his hand. Realizing what had happened, he lunged forward and tried to grab it. Old Man Albert pulled back, yelling for help. One of the bodyguards began to move in his direction. Before the situation could spiral further, a loud voice shouted from the entrance, "Police! Nobody move!" Armed officers stormed into the house, weapons raised. Locke froze. Gregory, who had snuck in through the back shortly after Locke's arrival, tried to slip away, but was immediately grabbed and handcuffed. Old Man Albert backed away as officers took control of Thessaloniki. Walter stood in shock as everything unfolded. The police explained they had received a real-time recording of Locke offering a bribe and threatening a child's health, enough to issue an immediate warrant. The officers placed Locke in cuffs, reading him his rights. His calm mask finally cracked, and he shouted, "You don't understand what you're doing." But no one listened. It was over. MediGen's secrets were no longer hidden. Officers collected evidence from the house, including the RxC-17 vials and hidden documents. Paramedics arrived moments later and began examining Ethan. One of the doctors looked at Old Man Albert and said, "There might be a way to help him. We'll need to act fast." Within minutes, they confirmed what Old Man Albert had feared for weeks. The compound RxC-17 was designed to block signals between the brain and the muscles. It didn't destroy nerves, it suppressed them. A doctor explained, "It's not permanent, but the longer it stays in the system, the harder it is to reverse." Old Man Albert asked, "Is there a treatment?" The doctor nodded. "There's an antidote. It was never made public, but we found mentions of it in the database we accessed through MediGen records." Walter stood by Ethan's side, watching as the team prepared him for immediate transfer. "We're taking him to a secure hospital. One of the paramedics said he'll need intensive care, but if we start soon, there's a real chance for a recovery, for the first time in a long while." Walter felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. He leaned down and kissed his son's forehead. Ethan, weak but conscious, gave a small smile. As the ambulance pulled away, Walter stood in the driveway, watching until the flashing lights disappeared from view. Old Man Albert stood beside him, his phone still in his hand. The police had already taken Locke and Gregory into custody. Reporters had started to gather near the gates. The truth had spread fast. Walter looked at Old Man Albert and said, "I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You don't have to. Just fight for him now," he nodded. "I will." That sentence meant everything. It wasn't a promise to him. It was a promise to Ethan, a promise that he would no longer be left in the hands of companies that lied, that he would no longer be treated like an experiment. Walter had spent years running from his past, trying to fix things with money and silence. But now he understood that actual strength came from standing up, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He would face every consequence, every truth for his son. Back inside the mansion, everything felt different. The house, once filled with secrets and fear, now felt like a place where a new chapter could begin. The security systems were turned back on. The MediGen files were sealed and handed to the authorities. Old Man Albert started packing some of Ethan's things to bring to the hospital later. Walter walked through the room slowly, as if seeing everything for the first time. He stopped at Ethan's room, where the toys were still in place and the bed was unmade. He sat down and stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The garden, where so much had happened, looked peaceful again. He pulled out his phone, called the hospital, and asked for hourly updates. "Don't let him out of your sight," he told the nurse. As the call ended, he whispered to himself, "This time I will fight for you, my boy." And for the first time, he meant every word. Several months had passed since that terrifying night when everything changed. After weeks of treatment, daily therapy, and constant monitoring, Ethan was finally getting better. The antidote had worked slowly, helping his nervous system regain control. The doctors warned it would be a long road, but Walter never left his side. Old Man Albert was there too, supporting Ethan through every small victory. And then one morning, some Athinjensriedel happened. While trying to reach a toy on the floor, Ethan slowly pushed himself up and stood on his own. His legs shook, but he didn't fall. Walter, sitting nearby, dropped his newspaper and froze. Old Man Albert covered his mouth, tears already welling up. Ethan took one step, then another. He wobbled, but he kept going. 3 full steps before Old Man Albert caught him in a hug. Walter joined them, pulling both into his arms. "You did it, Ethan," he whispered. "You really did it." That marked a turning point. It wasn't just about walking. It was about taking his life back. News of the MediGen scandal had spread quickly after Locke's arrest. The video Old Man Albert recorded became the center of the investigation. Shared by every major news outlet, journalists uncovered hidden contracts, reports, and financial documents linking the company to illegal drug trials in multiple countries. Dozens of families came forward, sharing stories just like Walter's. Children harmed by a treatment they were told would save them. The company collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and government investigations. MediGen was officially dissolved by court order. Its assets were frozen. Key executives, including Dr. Gregory and Reginald Locke, faced multiple charges and remained behind bars. But for Walter, the story didn't end with justice. He wanted to do more. With Old Man Albert's encouragement, he donated a large part of his fortune to start a foundation. Its mission was simple: support and protect victims of illegal pharmaceutical testing. The organization offered medical care, legal help, and education for families who had nowhere else to turn. It became the legacy he wanted to leave behind. For Ethan and for Clara, Old Man Albert never left their side. He was no longer just the man who cleaned the rooms or cooked dinner. He had become part of the family in every way. Ethan saw him as a second father, and Walter trusted him more than anyone else. They shared meals, made decisions together, and supported one another. The mansion, once filled with coldness and silence, had changed. Light now entered rooms that had been closed for years. Laughter returned. Walter reopened parts of the house that had been locked away in grief. He and Old Man Albert painted Ethan's room a bright blue and let him pick out decorations for the hallway. Life was slowly finding its place again. Walter began writing about everything that had happened, not for profit, but to ensure no one forgot the cost of silence. Old Man Albert helped organize events for the foundation, sharing his story with courage. What had started as pain had grown into something powerful, something real. They were not just survivors. They were a family rebuilt. One warm morning, the 3 of them drove out to the cemetery where Clara was buried. It was Ethan's idea. He had asked to visit her. Old Man Albert helped him walk the final steps to the grave, guiding his pace. Walter stood beside them, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. The headstone was simple, elegant, and surrounded by fresh grass. Ethan looked at the grave quietly, then turned to Old Man Albert and took his hand. "Grandpa," he said softly, pointing at the sky. "The old grandpa sent you to take care of me." Old Man Albert's throat tightened. He crouched down, hugging him gently. Walter looked at both of them and couldn't stop the tears. He smiled through them, letting the emotion come without hiding it. It was a moment filled with meaning, not of sadness, but of peace. Clara was gone, but her love had never left. Somehow, through pain and time, her memory had helped build something new. Walter placed the flowers by the headstone and whispered, "He's okay now." The echoes of the past had softened. The long hallways that once felt like a prison now held life. Ethan's wheelchair sat in a corner no longer needed. Every day, toys were scattered in the living room. Fresh flowers sat on the windowsills. Old Man Albert cooked dinner while Walter helped Ethan set the table. There was music playing, and the sound of laughter filled their rooms. The house was alive again. No more secrets, no more fear. The truth had brought pain, but it had also brought healing. The foundation received letters of thanks every week, and new families were being helped every month. Walter continued to write, and Old Man Albert began sharing his experience publicly, inspiring others to speak out. What once felt like an ending had become a new beginning. Justice had been done, not just in court, but in the way they lived now. And that was something no money or silence could ever erase. That night, Walter stood at the window of his study, looking out at the garden. The same place where he once thought he had lost everything was now filled with life again. He watched as Ethan ran around slowly, playing with a ball, while Old Man Albert sat nearby reading a book. He opened the window and let the sounds of their laughter in. Closing his eyes for a moment, he breathed deeply and allowed himself to feel peace. Not forced or imagined, but real. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest was gone. He had made mistakes. He had looked away when he should have acted. But now, he had done the right thing. The truth had brought suffering, but it had also brought freedom. It's not just for Ethan's body, but for all of their hearts. The mansion, once a place of pain and silence, had become a home again. Walter smiled as he whispered to himself, "This is the life Clara would have wanted. This is our new dawn." I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.